All right, I think we have all three of our speakers. That's a good thing, right?
Mark, I'm having trouble making them co-owners. Do you think you can do that?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I gave you a little apprehension there. I'm here, safe and sound.
Okay. So I have Jason, Lori, Diana, and Gio as co-hosts. Anyone else need to be co-host?
I think that's it.
Carolyn's going to be doing some speaking during mine, but I'm going to just continue to share the slides. So I think that's all we need from the webinar presenting perspective.
Awesome. Okay, I think we should take it away. There will probably be a few more stragglers that come in, but this is Mark Humpert from AFWA. Really appreciate everyone turning out today. This is exciting This is SWAP Learning Series number 4 of many more to come, and really thrilled to have NatureServe, Lori and Gio, and Diana Day all helping out to kind of inform us of the tools that are available to help with SWAP revisions today. So excited about that. We'll have lots of time for Q&A at the end, and hope it's a productive session. Jason, do you want to introduce yourself and just sort of quickly walk through the agenda?
Hi, sure. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason Goldberg. I'm a biologist with the Office of Science Applications in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service based out of Washington, D.C. Want to thank everyone for joining us today. And today we're going to have a great discussion here on interactive data and tools for SWAP planning and implementation, courtesy of NatureServe. So the first speaker, we have a couple of speakers. The first is, and I apologize for probably mispronouncing this name, Gio Rapacchiolio. I'm so sorry.
Close enough, close enough, close enough. That's a great effort. Thank you.
So Gio will be talking about collaborative species habitat modeling for SWAPs. And then one that is much easier, but I'm sure I can still mess it up, is Lori Scott, a configurable platform for delivering SWAP interactive web mapping and reporting tools used by the 15 states. And then Diana Day, talking from Pennsylvania's Wildlife Action Plan, Conservation Opportunity Tool, user-guided approach supporting species of greatest conservation need. I think we're going to hold questions to the end, but if you also want to put them in the chat, we'll make sure we capture those as well. So unless I think there's anything else, Gio, we're going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So let me make sure I can successfully share my presentation here. Can you see it in presenter mode?
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having us. It's really exciting for us to be able to talk with you today and share some of our work and just hear your thoughts. So I think on behalf of NatureServe, thank you so much for having us. It's a great opportunity for us to be chatting with you. So I'm Gio Rapacchiolo, Director of Applied Data Science. I joined NatureServe about 2 years ago, just under. And one of my main responsibilities on NatureServe is to oversee the species habitat modeling program. And generating models is one of the main ways that we try and mobilize our data in derived products. So we take our amazing field data from around the NatureServe network, and one of the main products we try to generate as well is models. Recently, we've had a lot of interest in how this whole process can support SWAPs, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. I will be talking about our program and process more generally, and then we'll move towards how we're applying it to SWAPs today. We're in the infancy of applying this process to SWAPs, I should say. So today is really much more about the process than substantial progress for given SWAP projects, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions on any anticipated progress and ongoing work with SWAPs. So moving on right away, our process. This is a diagram that quite simply tries to describe our process in as little and as few a number of boxes as possible. And this was a difficult thing to achieve, believe it or not. So the first thing I want to point out is that embedded throughout the process is the key that really makes this process collaborative, and it's the engagement with natural heritage programs from across the NatureServe network. That is key both for obtaining the best available data on imperiled animals and plants, as well as some of the best available expertise on those species and knowledge about their habitat and their conservation status. The other fundamental part of the engagement is with the partner. So the folks that have funded the work that will most benefit from the model outputs and that have firm requirements as to what happens and what models are built. The actual process has 4 main steps, and really core to our methodology is this feedback loop you can see here on the left of this figure between model building and model review. Essentially, what we've built is a system for collaborative peer review of model outputs that takes something that is quite widely used and commonly done, a statistical model of the distribution of habitat of a species, but then takes it much, much further and uses it as sort of a catalyst for peer review and soliciting expertise from people around the NatureServe network and beyond. So we take that statistical output and try to move it further along and confront it with underground knowledge and build various versions of it to best account for underground knowledge. Then we move on to delivering and applying those model outputs, and we'll talk about a few examples of those. Essentially, the rest of these slides is going to be diving a little bit deeper into each of these boxes and having a look at some of how we carry out this process. So we're going to be looking at an example and taking it throughout the process. And you'll see this is not a species that we worked on in the context of SWAPs. That is, as I mentioned, because we do not have an example of a full model we've taken throughout the process here in the context of a SWAP. But this is an amazing example that we worked on with the Fish and Wildlife Service, where there was a dire need to update this ECOS range map. And so we worked with the range mapping program to actually make sure we refine this range map, which was being used in all sorts of decisions with respect to the species, the Apalachicola false rosemary, which is of concern and actually, highly imperiled, critically imperiled, a G1 rank. So let's see what we did here. First of all, we got hold of input data on the occurrence of the species. And our first step here is always to look to NatureServe network data. So the species is very range restricted, is a Florida endemic, and we got hold of the element occurrences, that's the spatial units of distribution data from across the NatureServe network from the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. Then, working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we also obtained a good number of field observations for the species from the Fish and Wildlife Service directly, and then proceeded to compile this information about the species. That's the first set of inputs. Now, at this point, what we tend to do is is engage our partners and experts from around the network to assess the quality and validity of those inputs. So we actually start a process of review of the inputs themselves to vet the information that goes into a model. The quality of the information that goes into a model will determine the quality of the outputs, as I'm sure you're all aware. And so it's a key step to actually assess the inputs properly. To do so, we've built a first tool here, which I'm going to demo a little bit. It's called the Model Inputs Review Tool, or Myrtle. And Myrtle allows you to navigate interactively in a map-based interface here and actually assess the input data that's being proposed into a model, as well as provide a series of comments spatially here on this interface to the modeler to actually assess some inputs, perhaps filter out some records that are not valid or they're not up to date any longer. And so this is the first tool that we'll use to solicit expert feedback at the stage of inputs. I don't have too much time to go into the nitty-gritty here, so this is just a prompt here to please get in touch with us if you want to see more about these tools or find out more even about the code or how we're doing these things. But the input species occurrence data is combined with environmental predictors from across our very large library of high resolution, 30-meter resolution environmental predictors, and for the relevant area. So we have this very large library of environmental predictors that we will use to essentially characterize what the environment looks like at locations where the species has been detected. And we use our modeling engine here. Again, I don't have a huge amount of time to go into the details, but we have our code as well as a number of other tools that will combine the occurrence data with environmental predictors to characterize, as I said, the environmental requirements of the species across the landscape, and then use that understanding to project more widely across the landscape to try and identify areas of probable habitat for the species. So what you see here as the main output that we provide to clients is a map of the probability of habitat across the landscape. The output from models is actually continuous all the way from 0 to 1, but we provide it in a more intelligible way, which is separated in these three categories here: high, medium, and low. And that, as I said, is the main output that you'll see over and over again. And essentially, you can interpret this as the probability from high to low that the environment is similar to locations where the species is known to occur, and therefore that particular grid cell is actually an area that has suitable habitat for the species. We move on to our second tool, and this is probably the most crucial here in terms of this collaborative process, and this is our Model Outputs Review Tool, or MORT. And it allows expert reviewers to play around with the output. So you see here, the reviewer is actually updating the thresholds that separate the three different categories between high, medium, and low, and actually is able to reveal more or less of the probability surface based on whether the reviewer thinks that we're under-predicting or over-predicting the distribution of the habitat. An absolutely key part of this review process is this sort of Yelp style rating here that the reviewer is able to give the model at the end to give us sort of a semi-quantitative review of the overall model, and actually it's sort of the best estimate of how happy the reviewer is with the way we've estimated habitat for the species. here is just an example of how we move through the cycle that I mentioned of model building and model review. So we've built a first version of a model and reviewed it using our model outputs review tool as shown. And we'll start gathering a number of comments. This is just an example here from a reviewer indicating that actually we should probably stray a little bit further with our predictions because it's likely that it might be additional habitat to the northeast. The star rating we received is 3 stars out of 5. What we did in response to this comment is add an additional watershed unit to the northeast where we actually predicted with the model we already had in hand, we predicted some additional habitat across that area. And you can see that based on such comments, we moved through different versions of this model and the actual distribution of habitat was updated, as well as the reviewer's sentiment for how closely the model now actually captures the habitat for the species. One key thing to note here is that expert review is a central part of our assessment of model confidence. And model confidence is what we found a very important thing to communicate to model users because it actually is the most open and transparent way of communicating that not all models are equal, not all models are right or true. In fact, none of them are. And so it sort of gives the model the appropriate level of confidence and an associated set of recommended uses to encourage or discourage users from using those particular model outputs for given applications. So based on the amount of effort we're able to put into a model and the number of model versions we're able to create, we generally tend to move towards higher model confidence. But expert review is one of the key inputs there, as well as the statistical performance of models and the integrity of inputs and methods that we've used. And so experts weighing in actually directly can inform the confidence of a model and therefore its recommended uses. We gather all this information and provide it in summary PDFs that are provided together with the spatial output. And so all this information is accessible and model users are able to refer back to it anytime they need when applying model outputs. I just want to show a few examples of model applications here as I move towards wrapping up. As I mentioned, this model was initially aimed at updating the ECOS range map, which was known to be overly inclusive and I believe based on county boundaries. And so you can see we used the model output here to update that ECOS range map into a one range map, which is now the map you will find for the Apalachicola False Rosemary if you were to visit the ECOS website or run any analyses in IPAC, for example. So we did the same thing for a handful of species. And I'm very excited that this process has been tested out in this way, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has endorsed it in this way, including a number of its biologists. Another key type of output that we can get from models is the set of treasure maps, and we call these candidly treasure maps, but essentially it's highlighting areas of high habitat probability where we currently do not have known observations of the species. And this can be a template to design a field survey or help guide inventory for the species. And so you can see here that we've highlighted areas of high habitat probability here in red, circled in blue, for if they're some radius away from known locations of the species. Another important application and useful application is to identify management responsibilities for different types of entities and therefore identify partners in conservation. So you can see that here what we've done is essentially identify who manages the land that overlaps the area of predicted habitat for a given species. And in this case, this was work done with the Bureau of Land Management to identify the degree of responsibility to BLM, as well as under other entities like the Forest Service. And we can start using this information to understand who the key partners are and which species are sort of more in need of action by a certain entity than others. I could not mention this additional amazing output that we can get from a series of models. And as we talk about swaps, we could do this for a particular state or regionally. And that's really stacking models on top of each other to identify clusters of the distribution of multiple species. This is output from the Map of Biodiversity Importance project, which was aiming to stack over 2,000 such models across the conterminous United States. And we're very happy that it was such a successful project that it actually ended up putting biodiversity mapping into the New York Times, which is something that happens very rarely. So we're still very excited about it, even though it happened some time ago now. Moving on to swaps. We're using this process now and applying it to support, in particular, the Utah Wildlife Action Plan. And then I'll mention a few others that we've started supporting or have supported in the past in slightly different capacities. The objective of this project is to generate the best available estimates of habitat distribution. So taking these models to the highest possible confidence for 13 species using our collaborative species habitat modeling process. Our main contacts at the Utah DNR are Paul Thompson and Liz Moore, who I wanted to acknowledge here because they've been fantastic in helping us carry this project forward. So these are the target species, just to show that for this project, we're actually modeling a number of the species at the Utah scale. So we're generating Utah boundary only models. That is a possibility. And then one of the species actually will be modeling range wide. So that's another possibility which we strongly encourage. Range wide models actually have a ton of great information there about relative responsibilities across boundaries, which we think are actually probably one of the main advantages of running species habitat models. And so could support certainly local swaps as well as regional swap efforts. The anticipated outcomes, and this is coming directly from DNR, is that these models will improve the information on the likely distribution of Utah SGCNs, species of greatest conservation need. They will provide guidance for future inventory and monitoring in some of the ways that I've shown here, especially for species that have limited information, like mollusks and plants or insects. They will allow prioritizing conservation actions across space, for example, by highlighting clusters of imperiled species, as well as help support decisions on resource development projects to avoid conflicts. One key outcome as well is that we can now provide a much more open and transparent workflow, both for Utah DNR, but as well as sharing that with the public and updating things like the Utah Field Guide and so on. I'll conclude just by mentioning that the NatureServe Network has supported other swap efforts, in particular, Tim Howard at the New York Natural Heritage Program has sort of overseen a couple of projects supporting Arizona and Nevada, modeling tens of species, both within the states as well as shared between the two states, which is a very cool development moving towards regional modeling efforts. And so I'll end it here just by saying, again, I've put my email up there. Please feel free to contact me about any of this work, about our modeling process. If you want to find out more, get hold of some information or even software or code. So let us know about it. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I'll take some questions at the end then. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio. And we do have one question that I've caught in the chat, and we'll swing back to it at the end.
Thanks so much.
So next up is Lori Scott. Lori, we'll go ahead and we'll turn it over to you.
Sorry, my window where the unmute was got hidden. Can you see my screen?
Can see you, can't see your screen yet.
Okay, 1 second. Got it. All right, how about now?
There we go. Yep, it's up.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Gio. And thanks to everyone for joining. Really looking forward to giving you an update about the next capability we want to share today, which is a configurable platform that's been successfully used in a number of states to deliver interactive mapping and reporting tools, including to further SWAP implementation and planning. Just to kick off, a little bit of background on NatureServe, which I think you all are aware of. And, as Gio went through his talk, just a reminder that we are both a nonprofit and also the hub of the NatureServe Natural Heritage Network. And so one of the roles we play is not just providing the science standards and methods and data, but also tool development. So we've developed a number of shared technology platforms that have been used throughout the network. And these, just highlighting a few, are Biotics, which is the biodiversity database used by state natural heritage programs and Canadian data centers to provide species and habitat content. It's a source of information that is in most, if not all, SWAPs. And then we have NatureServe Explorer, which is a public data delivery tool, which can provide information for more regional awareness as well as within an individual state. And then the tool we're going to focus on mainly today, which is the environmental review tools. But just to hit on a reminder of the NatureServe Explorer resource, in case anyone isn't aware, it can be a useful online resource for informing cross-state coordination and landscape scale planning. So this is the URL at the bottom of the screen. If you haven't visited it recently, it did undergo a major transformation a couple years back. So I'm showing two interfaces here. On the left is the primary NatureServe Explorer tool, which is a searchable database. You can search for all the species and ecosystem data that NatureServe aggregates and develops in collaboration with the network. And you can search by name, location, status, or any of those, a combination of any of those to get information down to, really fine-grained details. On the right, we're seeing NatureServe Explorer, which is a more recently released companion, which is a more map-centric tool that allows you to look at the distribution of a given species or also do search an area of interest. So here on the right, I'm showing an example of a habitat model, like the examples Gio just went through, how those are produced. And what you're seeing here is for this species that it's occurring in these two states in the Carolinas, and we're seeing in the background sort of a yellow-red map, which is conveying the conservation status, how it's been assessed at the state subnational level as an S1 critically imperiled in South Carolina and vulnerable S3 in North Carolina. We're seeing these generalized hexagons, a 343 square mile, sort of a generalized distribution of where the element occurrences have been tracked for the species. And then on top of that, we're seeing this habitat model in the categories of high, medium, and low probability. This is a view looking more nationally, just sort of across all the species data. And what you're seeing is a bit of a density map. So the bigger circles indicate areas where there's a higher number of species documented. You can click on any one of those areas and get a pop-up of the number broken out by animals and plants. Or you can do an area of interest search. You can explore an area. You can, in this example, bring in a layer of your own. I brought in forest boundaries, and then I selected one of the forests as the area to search. That then is intersecting the hexagons, is generalized hexagons that are the way we're sharing data publicly in Explorer Pro. And you can then run a biodiversity report. In this example, we can filter down to just those species that have US Endangered Species Act status. And then you can get a result here, which in this case is 9 species. So we're, again, kind of publicly displaying data at a certain scale. The other aspect of NatureServe Explorer Pro I want to note is that similar to the state tools I'm going to show you next, it's allowing us via access control because it's a tool that you register and get a login and identify who you are when you log in. We can sort of control access and deliver more fine-grained precise data under a data license to those who need to know more sensitive information and keep the public users access to just more general information. So the other thing I want to note is in NatureServe Explorer Pro, we also link out to state tools where users can get access directly to additional content. And that includes the state environmental review tools that we've developed in collaboration with state agencies. Without further ado, let me give you a bit more background on these tools. So this map is showing the footprint of where we've deployed these tools so far. And then the different colors here, the lighter blue indicates in Kansas, we have a tool in development now. So it's not in production like the others shown here. So if I just click through, you'll see, over the last decade where these tools have been deployed, starting in Virginia, Louisiana, Arizona, North Carolina, and so forth. Pennsylvania, you'll see light up twice because we have deployed 2 tools. Same thing in New Mexico. So here's where in 2019, we had a second tool deployed, and you're going to see more about that tool when Diana speaks next. And lastly, we have the one in development in Kansas. So I'm not going to dwell on these, but when we share the slides out, I wanted you to have a quick reference to be able to link directly to find these tools. They all have a public component, and they all have the ability to register for an account to be able to log in and potentially gain access to finer scale information. So one of the aspects of these tools is state agencies can configure, control the access to which types of users can get access to which data layers and which tools and which level of report information. So they're very, very flexible and very configurable. So what this it's one platform, one core platform that is then configured for each state. So it's using Drupal content management system, and it's using Esri's ArcGIS server, also known as ArcGIS Enterprise, for map visualization and spatial analysis. And we configure for each state, we undergo the process of customizing it and configuring an environmental review process that matches the agency's workflow, integrating the natural resource spatial layers, configuring the different project types, the way an application would be submitted for review, what kind of analysis rules. We develop a custom geo process that can string together these different tasks and analyze inputs according to specified decision rules and output results. Most states have implemented distinct reports for environmental review or more mandatory kind of screening versus more voluntary types of conservation planning or state wildlife action planning types of outputs. Some of the benefits, by partnering with the states and having one core platform that can then be extended and customized for each state, we've developed a way to streamline the permitting process, and that really saves a lot of time for agencies as well as people submitting projects. They can get a response much more quickly than previous manual process. The state agencies are benefiting from this one core platform that is very configurable. And when one state invests in new capabilities and platform enhancements, then the other states might benefit by enabling these features through core platform updates. And these tools have been customized in various ways, including to support implementation of state wildlife action plans. So just some numbers from last year. We launched 2 new tools, one in Minnesota and one in Tennessee. We've added across all the sites over 5,000 new users. We're up to over 12,000 users across all the sites. Over 43,000 projects were submitted last year, and of those, over 17,000 final projects had no conflict. So that's really saving a lot of time by streamlining agency attention on a smaller segment of projects where there may be a conflict and further consideration needed. And then over 4,700 conservation planning reports were generated. Just getting a look at what some of these tools look like in terms of SWAP relevant content. And these just a smattering. Carolyn's going to go into a bit more detail for Nebraska in a second, but I'm showing New Mexico on the top here, a conservation opportunity area map layer that's in the tool where you can click in and get more information about a given COA, and species of greatest conservation need can be included in report results when a user is analyzing an area. Same thing in Arizona, shown at the bottom here. And 2 more examples for South Dakota and Tennessee. South Dakota on the left, Tennessee on the right, again, integrating in conservation opportunity areas, also wildlife habitat maps. There's many, many map layers in these tools, many ways in which the data are analyzed and incorporated into the results. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Jezierski from Nebraska, who she's going to give a little more information about their conservation and environmental review tool.
All right, thank you, Lori. You can go to the opening slide. So today I'm going to talk about Nebraska's tool, and we call it the Conservation and Environmental Review Tool, or CERT for short. And this is the map landing page. So if you had a project that you wanted to get a review for, you would zoom into the area of the state where you wanted to do the project. You could draw your project boundaries, and then you can hit the button at the top that says Create Project. Nope, that's right. And it will take you to this. Yeah, it'll take you to this page where you'll put your project title in, and then you get to this part where you have to select your project type. All of these, except the one with the red arrow, are environmental reviews. And you'll see the conservation planning report has in parentheses behind it, not an environmental review. So the environmental review, those have a lot more, those are the regulatory side of the tool. And so we're going to talk today about the conservation planning report, since that's more of the SWAP side of the tool. All right, so then you would enter this data, you'd hit next, and you would come up, you would get this screen. Most likely under the project review results, it would show that it was generating a report, because it can take a little while, especially depending on how big your report is. And once the report was generated, you'd get an email saying, hey, your results are ready. Now, this is a unique project in that you see under the revision date, there's 2 dates. This was a restoration project I chatted about with a fisheries biologist 3 years ago. And when I was looking to put together this presentation, I thought, you know what, I can use the same outline and just hit generate report and have a report that's updated to what we now know in our CERT. So for every project, you will get a project report that's in a PDF, a shape file for GIS, the species results in an Excel spreadsheet. So these are the tables that are in the report, but they're in an Excel spreadsheet. And then you have the potential to generate a KMZ for using in Google Earth. So we're going to pretend like we clicked on that project report and go to the next slide. All right, this is the conservation planning report for this project. And And this, in the beginning of the report, it just gives basic information about the project, the size of it, what counties it's in, what watersheds it's in. And then the next, there is a page after this, it's information page, but then we get to the maps that are provided with the projects. Now, the black line you see, that's the line that I drew in, that's the project boundary. And the red line is the automatically generated 3-mile buffer on the project. And you'll see there is an aerial image-based map. The middle map actually shows the protected areas. Those fuchsia squares are Game and Parks properties. And then the last map is more of a topographic map. After the maps, the tables. And table 1 lists the protected areas. And for this project, there's only one protected area. It's just listed 2 different ways because it has 2 different information sources. So it's Pine Glen Wildlife Management Area. And that protected area is within the immediate vicinity of the project review area. All right, Laura, you can click. I have little boxes here. Okay, now let's go to table 2. So click again. All right, table 2 is the documented occurrences in the immediate vicinity of the project or the project review area. Okay, click again. And in this table, there's the special status species. So you can see we have the federally listed species, the state listed species, and then if whether or not the species is a species of greatest conservation need. And in Nebraska, we have tier 1 and tier 2. And then we have the state rank, the global rank, and then the taxonomic group. Now, what could also be included in this table would be S1 through S3 plants that are not designated as tier 1 or tier 2, natural communities, and selected special areas. So documented occurrences within the immediate vicinity of this project, you can see there's only a handful of species. There's actually 3 natural communities. And then you see that this project is within the Middle Niobrara biologically unique landscape. And that's our BULs is what our conservation opportunity areas. That's what we call them in Nebraska. And there's a link to that BUL report. And lastly, you see that this project is actually within a large intact block of habitat for at-risk species. So this project actually would be within a fairly large intact landscape. All right, now next slide. And then we have table 3, and right away you see, oh, there's a lot more species. And that's because these are documented occurrences within that 3-mile buffer. Otherwise, all the information is the same. It's just a little bit like spanning out a little bit from that project review area. All right, next. And then next again. Okay, and then lastly, we have table 4, which Lori, you can click. These are potential occurrences in the immediate vicinity of the project area. So this, we're looking even broader, and we're using range maps for species and models to determine what species might be in that project area. So the information is still the same for each species, but now we also have included in here the range or model. And go ahead and click, Lori. Now, this is the current version of our map, of our table 4. But we wanted to incorporate more of our state wildlife action plan into these conservation planning reports. So next slide. So we worked with NatureServe and we put together a competitive state wildlife grant for the plan enhancement sub-program. And we were funded. And the grant title is Developing Enhancing Tools to Obtain and Distribute Information about Nebraska's Species of Greatest Conservation Need. And so the money comes to the Nebraska Game Parks Commission, and then we're contracting with NatureServe to make the enhancements on our CERT. Okay, next slide. One of the first enhancements is that we want to add habitat, threats, and research and inventory information for all of the potential occurrences of our tier 1 at-risk species information. This is information coming directly from our state wildlife action plan, but instead of having to go to the state wildlife action plan and look these up, if that species is within your project area, it will be here in this report. Okay, next slide. The next step that we are going to do is, instead of having to take that extra step of opening up a document to the biologically unique landscape, we're going to append the document to the conservation planning report. All right, lastly, all right, so when you have to select what type of project, it says you can only select one project. Well, we would like to have a possibility of folks who are running environmental reviews to also get a conservation planning report. So they draw one outline, they do everything, but they can select, let's also generate a conservation planning report. And that's because the environmental review is strictly regulatory, whereas the conservation planning report is incorporating a lot more of our state wildlife action plan. And keeping those separate is important at our agency. So that is where this will be helpful. And my hope is that people who are doing environmental reviews projects will also go maybe the extra step and add in some of that SWOP information. And that's all. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thanks, Carolyn. And if we're holding questions to end, then I'll just wrap up with a few more slides to this will tee up the next talk from Diana, which is just to note again that we have two distinct tools that we developed for Pennsylvania. So whereas Carolyn was just talking about their approach where they're modifying their one tool and enhancing it to better incorporate their state wildlife action plan and offer the voluntary extra step of doing a conservation planning report when a project is submitted for environmental review. Pennsylvania has two separate tools. They've sort of really separated out the more regulatory tool, which is called the Pennsylvania Conservation Explorer, and that's stewarded by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And then there's a separate Pennsylvania Wildlife Action Plan COA tool, which is maintained by the Game Commission and Fish and Boat Commission for the state. So this table just compares and contrasts these two tools. So, you know, basically one is regulatory, the COA tool is non-regulatory, the PACE tool is regulatory. The PACE tool adds sort of an additional project site, and project scale of analysis in addition to landscape and site. It focuses more on T&E species and species of special concern, and it includes plants. That's the PACE tool versus the COA tool, which has got no plants, and it's focused on those SGCNs. And it's got a more broad, proactive consideration in the types of information provided out to users. And again, the two different tools are administered by different agencies in the state. So just to show you briefly how that PACE tool looks, it's got a similar look to what Carolyn just showed, where a user can submit an area of interest and they can accept that to be the basis of the project they run. And similar to what Carolyn showed, they would pick a project type and answer some questions, but then this is an example of the output report. And here you can see in this green box where different agency results and responses are incorporated. So through this one tool, the Fish and Boat Commission, the Game Commission, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as DCNR, their information is actually consulted and analyzed, and the workflow is fairly complex in that it routes potentially to each of those agencies as part of the workflow. And so that wraps up my part, and then we'll go to Diana so you can actually see the Pennsylvania's Wildlife Action Plan tool. So I will stop sharing and let Diana take it over.
Can folks see my?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Lori, for that great setup, and thanks to Mark and Jason for their incredible work on putting this series together. Also, continuing, I just want to thank my my co-author, Kathy Hafner, who is unable to be here today, but we are the leads for the Conservation Opportunity Area tool. continuing acknowledgements, just want to note that this work requires a lot of different partners, and key partners in developing the Conservation Opportunity Area tool, or sometimes I may shorten it by just saying COA tool, are Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and NatureServe, and Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, with funding provided by through state wildlife grants administered by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So why this tool? And essentially, we needed to make conservation delivery easier. Wildlife action plans are huge documents, and for example, the Pennsylvania Wildlife Action Plan is over 2,100 pages and is a great workout with multiple reps at 15 pounds, and has hundreds of actions. So where is conservation to be done? And that's difficult for a lot of users. And so what we wanted to do was to provide a web accessible tool that is user driven. So the result is the Conservation Opportunity Area tool. This wasn't done quickly. It's been quite a venture, starting out in June of 2014 with a structured decision-making workshop at NCTC, where the concept was developed. Then we had to work through leadership of both commissions, Game Commission and Fish and Boat Commission, to get their approval to move forward with this concept. Then Western Pennsylvania Conservancy helped develop essentially the first version of the tool. And then as Lori talked about, the way we structured this is having the NatureServe build the Conservation Explorer and the Conservation Opportunity Area tool. And there's some efficiencies there because we can share some base layers, and then also users can use the same credentials for both tools. And so that effort to adapt the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy version into the NatureServe platform took about a year and a half, and we launched the tool in 2019. And then since 2020, we've been in maintenance and enhancement mode. And I'm going to talk a little bit about an enhancement that's soon to be put forth here. And I'll do that right at the end of my talk. So there's some notable features about this tool. And essentially, we're bringing a large amount of information together and making it accessible and interpreting it for the users. Large amounts of information includes more than just the data itself, but it's also information from our Wildlife Action Plan. For example, our species accounts are accessible through the report. We also provide information on best management practices. And so because the user is able to identify a particular area, it makes it more relevant to them, and they can get information for areas of their interest. It's a dynamic database. It's regularly updated, typically quarterly. And right now we're up to over 632,000 records, which these data are gathered from multiple sources. You can see down below here from heritage data, from multiple citizen science groups, and from the Game Commission and Fish and Boat Commission databases. We built a tool to support a variety of audiences. Of course, we wanted the Wildlife Action Plan to be implemented. So we worked with resource managers We also want to support private landowners, especially in Pennsylvania forest landowners. There's information for researchers and educators, and of course, anyone interested in species of greatest conservation need, their habitats, can access the tool. And it's been used for project planning, for information for grant applications, and also simply just to get a list of species of greatest conservation need for an area. So briefly, report covers a lot of information. I'm going to touch a little bit on this in a little bit here, but essentially you can get information on conserved lands, where your area's interest is located, habitats, conservation actions, survey and research needs. We even have links to best management practices, and of course, species of greatest conservation need. Some of this looks familiar, but just to give you a little bit of background, looking under the hood of the tool, there is a matrix of more than 2.9 million planning units, which are 10-acre hexagons across the whole Commonwealth. And to each of these hexagons is embedded the species and habitat information and other information relevant to the tool. And the reason for this is to expedite retrieval when you're getting databases that are now over 600,000 records. Retrieval could take quite a while. So this really expedites retrieval of the data. In this graph on the left here, we have a priority for the way species are identified, in that known occurrences get priority over likely occurrences or unknown. In this case, the X's indicate known occurrences in these planning units. We also use modeled data, as been talked about in Lori and Caroline's presentation, and for high quality habitat models, where there is at least a 25% overlap with a planning unit, then we place the species as likely to occur. And for lower habitat suitability models, it's simply unknown. And so that's our priority, and that'll play in further in some of the outputs for the tool. So there are now over 500 species of greatest conservation need in the tool. And as noted earlier, we use a variety of data sources for this. So you can access the tool at the URL up here. And I'm not going to be able to provide a tutorial on the tool. I just want to provide some highlights. Certainly, if you have interest, you want to walk through the tool at some point, Kathy and I would be more than happy to demo the tool for you. So this is the home page, and you'll notice there's a lot of similarities with Nebraska's tool as well, with many of the tabs up here being the same. And users can simply go in if you haven't accessed the tool, and just create a new account. And on the bottom part of the home page, there are several pull-down menus, and I just highlighted one here, where to start. And we have a quick start guide, so you can just go to this guide, and it'll walk you through how to generate your access with your new credentials, and then also some basic functionality of the tool. You can get more information, detailed information, on the help page. So again, the tabs up here, I'm sure look familiar. We have the map page with several layers here on the left side. And we have these grouped by species of greatest conservation need, conservation planning layers, focal layers. For example, we have climate change, grouse, golden wing warbler, cerulean warbler, and streamside forest planning prioritization layers here that all can be pulled up within the tool. Protected lands, as well as reference layers such as HUCs and counties and congressional districts and such. Under the species of greatest conservation need, you can actually click by county range or watershed range and get a distribution map of a particular species or multiple species. And similarly to Nebraska's tool, you can click on the Create Area Interest Report, generate your area of interest, and then click Accept, and then walk through a very simple questionnaire, giving a name for your project and other information, and then you'll receive an email that you can then access to access your report. You can also go to My Projects, as Caroline was showing, a very similar setup with Nebraska's for My Projects to be able to access new and previously developed projects. So just jumping right to a report, you've generated your area of interest. You've got your report now, and this is what you would end up with. You got a map. You get information, basic information about your project area of interest, including natural areas, and these are hyperlinked then to the reports for these natural areas. There's a summary for your species of greatest conservation need. In this particular project, there were 15. There were 2 sensitive species, one from the Fish and Boat Commission, one from the Game Commission. We don't provide the names of the species. We want people to know that there are sensitive species present, so that they can then go into Conservation Explorer so they can avoid and minimize conflicts with those species. Then on the next page, you'll get a much more detailed output, which will group them by what we, in our plan, are prioritization categories. In this case, this one is contribute to conservation of globally or regionally important species. And then walking through this, there's, for example, the West Virginia white. It's a year-round occurrence. It's got a priority score in this prioritization category of a 2. 1, 2, and 3 are considered high, and anything 4, 5, or 6 considered low. It has a likely occurrence, and then when you get habitat information, you get the macro habitats and specific habitat requirements. Here is that information on the sensitive species. It's in this prioritization category, but we don't provide the name or the habitat, just that we want people to reach out to us or to put the project into Conservation Explorer. Under the prevent common species from becoming at risk, another prioritization category, here these species are known, whereas the West Virginia white was likely, so it was modeled. We also get habitat map and a table indicating the number of acres and percent of the habitat, and then also the length of streams and river habitat. These are based upon the Nature Conservancy Northeast Terrestrial and Habitat Classification System. Then in the next part of the report, there's information on conservation opportunities, and these are grouped by primary actions and secondary actions. And then there's a description here of how that is determined. Essentially, we're looking at known are more have a higher priority than likely, and then the species priority, which I mentioned earlier, is 1, 2, or 3. just greater than a 4, 5, or 6 in the categories, and then the species action priority, which was identified in the Wildlife Action Plan for each of the specific actions. So these are grouped by tracks, major tracks categories, level 2, and then the specific actions identified by the species account authors then are grouped under those tracks categories. And in the species benefiting, you'll note that these are not italicized, so these are considered known occurrences. The italicized species are likely occurrences. Also, as mentioned earlier, we have links to best management practices for here conserve trees along streams and rivers and around wetlands. For people wanting to implement that action, we wanted to provide some idea of, if they're not familiar with it, on what that might require. So we have links to best management practices as shown here. And then here's secondary actions established similarly with italicized species indicating likely occurrences. So the priority, the primary actions would be for those that are known occurrences, and we want people to implement those actions first, if that is something that they're able to do, over those that are likely to occur. And we also have research and survey needs for known vertebrate species. So if you have research and survey needs for all of them, it's quite a dissertation. So we tried to limit it to those that are known because those are the ones that we, again, would want people to focus on. So we have listing of the research and survey needs for the species. And then we provide contact information. We want people to be able to reach out to us. And for the Game Commission, the contact information is actually adjusted based upon the region in which your area of interest is located. So folks have questions about their area of interest report, what they need to do. We're glad to work with them on that. So I mentioned that we have an enhancement forthcoming, and we're calling it the Conservation Action Tracker, and our CAT. And this tool will allow users to use an existing area of interest. So as you've gone in and created an area of interest through the Conservation Opportunity Area tool, you'll be able to use that area of interest, or you'll be able to delineate a new action area. And then there'll be a series of questions or forms to fill out that will allow the user to specify if the project focus is for a species or a habitat, and you can select the target species or habitat depending upon which group category you selected. Then you will be able to select specific actions and research and survey needs, and these are from the Wildlife Action Plan, so that as the users select these, we will be able then to document which actions are being implemented or are being planned for work. You can specify project visibility. Some of the projects the user may want to keep private. You may want to feel comfortable with having the project displayed at a county level or at a HUC 8 level. Or you may say, like, I don't care, it can be public, and you can either have the area or a point visible to the public. And then the user will be able to work in groups. So if you have a project that you have several staff within your organization or agency, that they're working on, you can bring them in and work in the group. Or if you're working across organizations, you can bring users and share your project, and then they can work on it as well. So some really great features. We're really excited about this tool, and we're looking forward to seeing that one launched here shortly. So feel free to contact Kathy or me if you have questions, want to walk through it, or just wanted to talk more about it. We could go on and on, but I know we got other questions we need to address. And I'll just leave you with this comment from Kevin Yoder, Conservation Forester from the Nature Conservancy, about his sentiments regarding the Conservation Opportunity Area tool. So I thank you for your attention, and again, thanks for the opportunity to present here tonight, this afternoon.
Thanks, Diana. So we do have a couple of minutes here for a Q&A, and then we wanted to ask everyone here for a couple of things. I think I'm going to ask, actually, Diana, since we've got you already, there were a couple of questions that I think we might start with. Are there any recommendations for SWOT data format or database structure to make something like the COA tool possible for a state to develop after the 2025 State Wildlife Action Plan?
Recommendations. I guess I'm not quite sure. I mean, as far as actual fields, is that what you're?
Yeah, it could be do's and don'ts too. Maybe it's things that like you wish your data had been in a different format, or some pitfalls.
I'm sure there were changes that we would want to make. I can't think of anything offhand right now. It certainly, yeah, I mean, I think we initially had the data in an Access database, and we're actually moving from that, but it's a different part of it's not really associated with the tool. I'll think about that one. Sorry, I can't give you a more specific answer.
I'll give you another one then, hopefully a little easier.
Uh-oh.
What were some of the reasons you made your COA tool separate from your ERT?
Well, I think the primary reason for that is that the Wildlife Action Plan is non-regulatory, and the ERT is regulatory, and we wanted to make sure that we kept that distinction. And that's really the major reason for that, is that we really wanted to make sure that there was no confusion with regulatory and non-regulatory features.
All right, and then I just have one more here, which is I think also pretty short. Then we'll go back to some of the others. Wondering how sensitive species locations are handled in the database, HERP specifically.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have used different groups. So the locations are in the database, but depending upon your user level, much like what Lori was talking about with the database that she's working with, depending upon your user level access, sensitive species may or may not be visible to you. So just as showing in the report. So the data are in the system, but the access to it may not, is dependent upon the user access level.
Gotcha. So I think what I want to do, given that we have 15 minutes left, I will make sure that the other questions go to the speakers today. So I want to thank them again for their time. So we will follow up with that in the notes. But given that there are about 60 of us still here, wanted to open it up to questions from the group and actually ask you 3 different questions that I'm going to post here in the chat. what is your experience using NatureServe data and tools? What could NatureServe do better to better serve your state during its SWAP revision? And what other data sources and tools / functionality can help support SWAP planning and implementation? Would like to be able to hear from the group on this. And Diana, I think I'm trying to figure out how to do it. If you can stop your presentation. Great, thank you.
Don't be shy. There must be something we can do better.
You can either just speak up or if you want to raise your hand, either will work. All right, well, while folks come back to it, I think, okay, so we answered one of the other questions here. Catch your conservation. Let me see if there are any others. Actually, so Gio, I got one for you that had come in. I'm curious about. How do you incorporate climate change into your models? You were talking about looking at species occurrence and probable distribution. So how do you incorporate future possible changes into your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we currently do not do that by default or at all, I would say. I mean, it's basically one of the main applications that we want to start spending a lot more time working on. And there certainly is interest. It's an additional component. And so there is information in the models we build for the sort of current time period about the relationship between species occurrence and features of the climate, but we don't project anything forward based on climate change scenarios at the moment. And we just have not had that be a priority for the funding associated with these projects at the moment, but we would very much like to start working on it.
So I'm gonna have to make a note when I send you the notes to send you the voluntary guidance we prepared on incorporating climate change into swaps.
That would be
That's my own little commercial, but I'll make a note of it.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's see. So I saw a comment from Caroline, just responding that both the swaps and the environmental review process are part of the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. I'm an optimist. I hope that folks will run both reports and go beyond what was required by the regulatory process. Okay. Do we have any other questions, or does anyone have feedback on the questions I put in?
I guess I can pop in. I've been in this position for about 3.5 years, and the whole development of the CERT happened prior to me starting my position. I started this position and took over for somebody who had been in this position for, I don't know, 20 years, a long time. And I have found that working with NatureServe, they're super helpful. Like, I work with Lori and with John, and really, really helpful. And we have a new data manager coming on board, and I'm sure she's going to be working a lot with the folks at NatureServe. And even putting together this grant, we were able to, I mean, NatureServe is providing the match for the plan enhancement grant. So that made it an easy, for us, we're like, sweet, let's do this and see if we get funded. So I've enjoyed very much working with NatureServe on these projects.
Thanks, Carolyn. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, so Gio, and this is probably a super naive question, but with the species habitat modeling, how does that work with migratory species? Can you do it on migratory species? And I'm thinking, like, we have all this eBird data out there. Is that a source of data for doing a lot of rapid modeling for birds?
No, that's not a naive question at all. It's a very difficult one to answer. There's definitely a lot more challenges to modeling migratory species or species that similarly have some sort of complicated life histories. eBird have run their own habitat models based on their own data. So actually, you probably can find ready-made models based on eBird data by visiting the eBird website or getting hold of their information. If you're interested in eBird only models, we certainly run models for migratory species. We just have to potentially run different sets of models for different stages of the species life cycle. So we can have to adapt our workflow a little bit. And sometimes it presents challenges and is not quite as satisfactory. So we'll definitely work with migratory species, and we do, but more challenging, definitely.
Great, thank you.
Right, so I'm seeing just a couple of comments that I'll attach into the notes. Virginia, Ginny.
Hey, good afternoon. I really appreciate the presentations, and I want to echo Carolyn that NatureServe is awesome to work with, both at the national level and then locally with our natural heritage program here in New Mexico. But I guess, so the two thoughts that I had, and I don't know, how broadly they're shared by other states, but and I've talked a little bit with John about this already, but in terms of swaps and swap revisions, I think there's a lot of states out there that already have some sort of swap website. And some of us have kind of copied each other, so some of them look pretty similar, but there's plenty of states that don't. And so I think sort of one open question for NatureServe is whether there's really any interest in doing more of a content management type swap template, template for a website. I mean, I think the conservation opportunity area tool that Pennsylvania has really cool functionality in terms of being able to look at specific parts of your state. But in terms of just having the information that's in the swaps about individual SGCN and habitats and conservation opportunity areas and all of that, which is really more of a content management thing than a web-based or a map-based functionality. I know that like for New Mexico, we've developed our own content management system for the swap, and that's great. But if there were some sort of consistent template that all states could use so that they look more consistent, and that they could be managed by one consistent entity instead of having sort of a separate contractor, I think that would be very interesting, at least for New Mexico. And then my only other thing is that climate change vulnerability assessments are something that, at least for New Mexico, I've been struggling to find a good fit in terms of a contractor that's interested in working on that for our next swap revision. And I know Gio just mentioned that climate change is not really a part of the modeling that they're doing at this point. But if there were any interest in broader assessment of lots of species in terms of climate vulnerability, again, for New Mexico, that's something that's definitely of interest. And I don't know how interesting it would be for other states, but those are my two things: swap template and swap website template and climate vulnerability assessments.
Thanks, Jenny. Lori, I see you got a response.
Yeah, just taking them one at a time. I have talked a little bit with John about that interest you mentioned, Ginny, and yeah, I'd see, because our existing ER tool is built in Drupal, it is a content management system. I could see creating that kind of a templated facility for expanding, the textual typical swap content in a repeatable module. So I think that would make sense to complement and be an optional add-on to the ER tool platform. And maybe embedded in your question is, would there be a version of that that's just that without sort of all the interactive mapping? But it's certainly worth talking through what the interest is. And then on the climate change vulnerability assessment front, I did want to mention that we have a new project. Bruce Young, who's one of our lead scientists along with Gio, we're working with USGS, CSC, the climate, whatever, I forget what that acronym stands for, the science centers, to actually build a new web-enabled, more interactive online version of the climate change vulnerability index tool, which many states have used to do those climate change assessments. So there's a new capability coming, and the plan is for that to be online in time to support the 2025 SWAP revisions. So that's exciting.
Okay, thanks. So I think we're gonna have to wrap that up with questions. If you do have any others, please go ahead and send them in to me or to Mark, and we'll be happy to forward them along. Mark, I'm gonna turn it over to you for last words. Close us out.
Yeah, again, thanks to our presenters. Thank you to NatureServe. I think this is a really valuable presentation and great timing with SWAP revisions happening in the next couple of years. So just thank you to everyone. Thanks for your participation. I think we had over 70 folks on today listening in, and it'll be recorded. So if you had to leave for any part of it and want to listen, we'll be sending the link around later this week. But again, thank you, Lori and Gio, Diana, Caroline, everyone that was speaking today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.
Good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.